What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected icons walks into a cheerful morning studio and walks out leaving silence, shock, and the sound of his own principles echoing behind him? It was supposed to be a simple interview, a light, easy conversation. Samuel L. Jackson, the legend himself, was there to promote his latest film, crack a few jokes, and remind America why he's one of the most commanding presences in cinema. But what unfolded inside that bright, smiling studio wasn't entertainment. It was tension. Raw, uncomfortable, and painfully real, and in just 38 seconds, it would explode into one of the most talked-about live television moments of the decade. The set of Good Morning America is built to feel safe. Bright colors, calm hosts, laughter that fills the air before every broadcast. Millions tune in each morning to escape the chaos of the world, to start their day with warmth and familiarity. That day began no differently. Robin Roberts smiled as the cameras rolled, George Stephanopoulos adjusted his notes, and Michael Strahan, the former athlete turned morning host, sat confidently across from his guest, ready, or so he thought, to lead the conversation. The lights came up, applause faded, and as the director counted down, 3, 2, 1, everything seemed perfect. But there's a strange thing about live television. It doesn't forgive misjudgment. Every look, every pause, every word you shouldn't have said gets broadcast in high definition to millions of eyes. There's no edit button, no second take. When Michael Strahan opened his mouth to begin that interview, no one in that studio could have predicted how quickly it would unravel. Because sometimes, all it takes is one question, one careless moment, to turn respect into confrontation. The clash that followed wasn't scripted, it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't the kind of drama morning TV thrives on. It was something much deeper, much uglier, a collision of pride and principle, of ego and experience, of a man who's earned his legacy, and another who didn't know where the line of respect was drawn. And as the world would soon see, Samuel L. Jackson wasn't about to sit quietly while someone tried to cross it. By the time the segment ended, the energy inside Good Morning America had changed completely. The smiles were gone, the laughter silenced, and Michael Strahan, one of America's most recognizable television personalities, would soon learn that a single lapse in judgment could cost far more than an awkward moment, because what began as a conversation ended as a statement, not in words but in action. When Samuel L. Jackson stood up, unhooked his microphone, and walked out, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't curse, he didn't look back. He simply left, with his dignity intact, and that's what made it unforgettable. The morning had that polished perfection only television can create. Bright studio lights washed the set in gold, every reflection carefully measured, every smile rehearsed to look spontaneous. Producers whispered through earpieces. Cameras glided across the floor. It was another ordinary day at Good Morning America. The kind of morning that feels safe, predictable. The kind where nothing ever really goes wrong. And then Samuel L. Jackson walked in, greeted everyone the same way he always did. A quick smile, a firm handshake, a quiet confidence that filled the room before he even sat down. For decades, Samuel had been the definition of professionalism. No scandals, no ego, just presence. That kind of quiet authority doesn't come from fame. It comes from years of showing up and earning respect. One role at a time, Robin Roberts welcomed him warmly, her laugh genuine, the kind that puts guests at ease. George Stephanopoulos flipped through his notes, meticulous as always, and Michael Strahan, charming, confident, camera ready, took his seat across from the guest of honor. On the surface, everything was perfect. The studio lights shimmered, the audience murmured in anticipation, and the teleprompter scrolled smoothly through its script. But behind the smiles, there was something subtle, A stillness, the kind of silence that only exists right before a storm. The conversation started easily. Robin mentioned Samuel's new film, an explosive action thriller that had critics buzzing. Samuel laughed, describing the long shooting days, the stunts, the heat of the desert set. It was natural. Rhythmic, the effortless exchange of seasoned professionals. Michael chimed in occasionally, cracking a few jokes, flashing that signature grin that America had come to love. But there was an edge in his tone. Faint, almost invisible at first, that only those closest to the moment could sense. The kind of sharpness that hides behind humor, a smirk that lingers just a second too long. Samuel noticed it. He didn't react. Not yet. He simply leaned back, one eyebrow raised, a look that said, "I've seen this before." It wasn't tension. Not yet. But something in the air shifted. If you've ever watched a storm roll in, you know the feeling. The air gets heavier. The light changes. Birds go silent, as if the world itself knows what's coming. That was the studio in that moment. No one said it out loud, but you could feel it, the unease quietly growing beneath the surface of small talk. The calm was still there, but fragile now, like glass under pressure. As Michael shuffled his cue cards, preparing for the next question, the crew behind the cameras leaned in a little closer. Even they didn't know why. They just sensed that something big, was about to happen. And within moments, it would, because the next words out of Michael Strahan's mouth would turn that calm morning into chaos. It started with a smile, that kind of television smile, polished, practiced, and perfectly timed. Michael Strahan leaned forward in his chair, cue cards in hand, the studio lights catching the edge of his grin. The tone of the conversation had been smooth until then, but everyone watching, in the studio, in the control room, even at home, would later say they felt it. Something changed in that instant. Michael shuffled his cards, looked down, then back up at Samuel, and with a half laugh, half scoff, he asked the question, "So, Samuel, you ever get tired of playing yourself?" The room froze. It was meant to sound casual, maybe even playful. But there was something in the delivery, something that didn't feel like a joke. A sharpness, a hint of mockery hiding beneath the charm. For a split second, Samuel didn't move, no blink, no smirk, nothing, just silence, the kind of silence that swallows a room whole. Robin's eyes flicked to Michael, then back to Samuel. George shifted in his chair, pretending to read his notes, pretending not to feel the tension thickening in the air. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged nervous glances. They knew that tone. They'd seen that kind of question before, the kind that derails interviews and ruins reputations. Samuel finally leaned forward, his hands clasped, voice calm. "I'm sorry," he said. Almost too softly. "What do you mean by that?" It wasn't anger. It wasn't defensiveness. It was control. Measured, deliberate control. Michael hesitated. He hadn't expected pushback. He chuckled, trying to brush it off. "I just mean, you've got a certain attitude, right? That same kind of character in every movie. People say it's like you being you." There it was. The second strike. And this time, it landed. Samuel exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He could have snapped. He could have thrown the words back twice as hard, but he didn't. Instead, he just stared at Michael, that same iconic Samuel L. Jackson stare, quiet, piercing, unblinking. The kind that cuts deeper than any insult ever could. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or stay silent. Some did both. An awkward, scattered chuckle that filled the empty space where civility used to be. In the control room, a voice crackled through the headset, cut to Robin. Now. But it was too late. The moment had already escaped control. Robin tried to steer the conversation back, her tone overly bright, forced. "So, Samuel, Tell us about the message behind this new project." But Samuel's eyes never left Michael, and when he finally spoke, his words were slow, precise, the kind of words that don't need volume to hit hard. "You know, Michael, there's a difference between playing a character and becoming one." Another silence. Deeper this time. A silence that said everything. You could feel the energy shift, the warmth gone, replaced by something raw and real. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was confrontation wrapped in civility, and from that single question, the storm had begun. The silence hung in the air like static. You could almost hear the hum of the lights above, the faint shuffle of a cameraman shifting his stance. Samuel L. Jackson sat perfectly still. Michael Strahan leaned back in his chair, smiling. But it wasn't a genuine smile anymore. It was defense, ego disguised as charm. And then it happened, the shift, the point of no return. Michael chuckled, tapping his cue cards against his knee. "Come on, Sam, don't get all serious on me. You know what I mean. People love you. The yelling, the catchphrases, the attitude. That's what makes you, you." He said it lightly, but the words landed heavy. Samuel's eyes narrowed just slightly, just enough for the audience to feel the chill. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. "I'm not a caricature, Michael. I'm an actor. There's a difference." The crowd went quiet again, that uncomfortable quiet that seeps into every corner of the room. Robin tried to laugh it off. All right. Let's not start a debate this early in the morning." But her voice wavered. She could feel what everyone else could. This wasn't playful anymore. Michael smirked. "I'm just saying, Sam. Sometimes you come across like you're still in character. Like maybe you don't know where Samuel ends and the movie starts." That was it. The moment the interview stopped being an interview. Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Michael. "You know," he said, his tone sharpened now. "I've been doing this longer than most people in this business even knew what they wanted to do with their lives. You don't get to tell me who I am." Michael tried to interject. "I'm not telling you who." But Samuel cut him off, still calm but cold. "No, you're implying. And that's worse." The audience didn't move. No laughter. No applause. Just tension thick enough to taste. Behind the cameras, producers were waving their hands frantically, mouthing, "Move on, move on." But neither man moved. It was live television, and this was now something raw, something real. Two men locked in an invisible war, one fighting for respect, the other for control. Michael forced another laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Hey, I'm just asking questions, man. That's my job." Samuel shook his head. "There's a difference between asking questions and taking shots." Robin stepped in again, voice soft but trembling. "Gentlemen, maybe we can talk about—" But it was too late. The damage was done. The warmth that carried most morning shows had vanished completely. And then, without warning, Samuel pushed back his chair, not angrily, just decisively. He looked straight into the camera, then back at Michael. "You know what? I don't need this." He stood up. The studio fell silent. Robin froze. George stared, speechless. Even Michael didn't have a comeback this time. Samuel straightened his jacket, took a breath, and walked off the set. No shouting. No scene. Just quiet power. The camera tried to follow him, but producers cut the feed a second too late. For a brief, unforgettable moment, millions of viewers watched Samuel L. Jackson walk away, calm, composed, unbothered, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly looked very, very small. The clash was over, but the fallout had just begun. The studio was chaos wrapped in silence. Robin's voice trembled as she tried to steer the show back on track, but everyone knew it was over. The illusion of morning show harmony had shattered. Michael sat there, jaw tight, refusing to look at anyone. Producers whispered into earpieces, scrambling for a commercial break that came too late. Samuel L. Jackson was gone, and with him, The last shred of control. The audience didn't clap. They just stared, stunned. In that moment, everyone realized something brutal and undeniable. This wasn't television anymore. This was implosion. Live. When the cameras came back, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Robin and George sat upright, faces composed, voices calm, but the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Robin spoke first, her tone soft but steady. "Welcome back. As you can see, we've had an unexpected turn of events." George followed, apologizing to Samuel and the viewers, trying desperately to stitch together a moment that was already too far gone. And then there was Michael, silent, furious, burning behind his forced smile. He sat between them like a ghost of his own mistake, the weight of the moment pressing down harder with every passing second. Every segment that followed was hollow. The cooking guest fumbled their lines. The meteorologist rushed through the forecast. Everyone was just waiting for the clock to run out, for the lights to dim, for the nightmare to end. When it finally did, the applause was hesitant, confused, the sound of an audience unsure whether they had just witnessed television or a breakdown, and behind every fake smile, every camera flash, one truth lingered. The damage was done, and it was live. The moment the broadcast ended, the studio erupted. Producers flooded the floor, voices overlapping, headsets buzzing with panic. Assistants rushed in with clipboards and trembling hands, trying to figure out who was talking to who and what could possibly be salvaged. Robin sat in silence, staring at the empty chair where Samuel had been. Her expression said everything. Disbelief, guilt, exhaustion. George rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. He'd spent decades building credibility, and in just a few fiery minutes, it had all gone up in smoke. Michael stormed off before anyone could stop him, ignoring every plea to stay and talk this out. He slammed his dressing room door, the sound echoing through the hallway like a punctuation mark to disaster. Inside, he paced, muttering about fairness, about honesty, about being the only one willing to ask real questions. Meanwhile, in the control room, executives were already on the phone, damage control in full swing. Clips were spreading. Online at lightning speed, Samuel Jackson was trending, and everyone knew what that meant. The story wasn't just out there, and it was exploding, and no PR statement in the world could stop it now. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. Clips of the confrontation flooded every platform. TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. People couldn't look away. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Thousands of comments poured in. Most were outraged, not at Samuel, but at Michael. Viewers called it disrespectful, painful to watch, and the most uncomfortable interview in years. Celebrities chimed in too. Actors, journalists, even former co-hosts, all siding with Samuel L. Jackson. What struck people most wasn't just the argument itself, but how Samuel handled it. He never shouted, never insulted. He just drew a line, and when it was crossed, he walked away. That, people said, was power. Meanwhile, Michael's name began trending for all the wrong reasons. Memes surfaced. Late-night hosts joked about it, and public opinion turned fast. Some tried defending him, saying he was just doing his job. But it didn't matter. The narrative was already written. One man had kept his dignity. The other had lost his. And the world wasn't just watching. It was judging, dissecting, and replaying every second of it, frame by frame. By noon, the network was in full-blown crisis mode. Producers were summoned to emergency meetings. Executives were on calls with PR teams. What happened wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. Good Morning America had built its reputation on warmth, professionalism, and charm. But now, headlines read, Samuel L. Jackson walks out after on-air clash. Clips of Michael's smug grin and Samuel's quiet dignity were being analyzed frame by frame on every outlet. Inside the studio, the mood was grim. Robin and George were furious, not just at Michael, but at what he'd done to their show. Crew members whispered about whether Michael would even have a job by the end of the week. Some said he'd gone too far. Others said he'd finally shown his true colors. Meanwhile, Samuel stayed silent. No interviews, no tweets, just silence. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than anything Michael could ever say. By evening, the story wasn't about the interview anymore. It was about respect, ego, professionalism, and how one man, by refusing to stoop to someone else's level, had reminded the world what true power really looks like. In the end, this wasn't just a viral moment, it was a mirror, reflecting something bigger about fame, ego, and respect. Samuel L. Jackson didn't win because he shouted the loudest. He won because he didn't have to. He understood something Michael clearly didn't. Real strength isn't about dominating the room. It's about knowing when to walk away from it. In an era where outrage fuels views and conflict drives clicks, Samuel reminded everyone of an older kind of power. Dignity. The kind that doesn't need to defend itself. The kind that speaks through silence. Michael's words may have filled the air that morning, but Samuel's composure echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling, because sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made with anger. It's made with restraint, and that's what the world saw that day, a masterclass in grace under fire. The moment will fade from headlines eventually, but the lesson won't. Respect is earned over time, and once lost, no spotlight in the world can bring it back.